Hey guys, Ducks preseason hockey is finally here. We're going to talk all about that on this edition of Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
You're Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Heyo, how's it going? Welcome to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jason Hernandez. I've been covering hockey for over a decade. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit fanduel.com to get started right now. So we've got a bit to talk about. Hockey is finally around the corner. In fact, hockey is finally just about here. So it starts tonight at the Shark Tank in San Jose, which is kind of ironic. I actually sort of didn't pay attention to all that. So I am actually going to San Jose, but not for the purposes of Ducks hockey tonight. But I will be watching the game later, and I'll be giving my full thoughts on that. But in the meantime, let's get started and let's talk about it. Preseason hockey's finally here. There's a couple of interesting storylines going into this game. So even though it's not in the bullet points, I first want to talk about Trevor Zegras. I don't know what's going on here. There we go. So as far as Trevor Zegras is concerned, he's just fine. So this was reported by Derek Lee. I don't know why my audio is doing this. So Derek Lee actually went out to practice and saw that Trevor Zegras was indeed out skating, and he is fine. Although he did have some facial lacerations, is the best way to put it. So some scarring there, but he was out there skating. He looks fine. Um, just like any good hockey player, you miss the rest of the game, but you get stitched up and you come back out the following game. And that's exactly what's happened with Z. So despite getting struck in the face by an errant puck, he did get stitched up. He did get taken care of, and he was back on the ice for practice. And he may or may not make this short 1 hour trip tonight. But I can tell you from Eric Stevens of The Athletic that Ducks Sharks are tonight. And I waited to record this because I wanted to see if there was any possible changes, and there was. So Anaheim notables that he mentioned: Vakanainen, Leeson, McGinn, Harkins, Regenda, Warren, Terrance, Dionisio, Sidorov, Hines. And notables for San Jose: Smith, Kunin, Bystedt, Toffoli, Ruta, Grunstrom, Wallman, Zetterlund, Goodrow, Wenberg, and Bailey. Interesting. So I'm still not sure if that means those are players that are necessarily going to play, that are going to have some more time tonight. I would assume that because it is the first preseason game, they're probably not going to play a lot of their big guns tonight at the Shark Tank, for the sole reason that the coaching staff wants to see what they have. They want to see what they have to work with. We've seen this all across the National Hockey League so far in their preseason games, Sharks included, where a few standout players will come out, a few rookies will come out, and the rest of the veterans are not going to play just yet. Again, because they want to figure out who they've got, what they've got, and what cuts should be made moving forward. Speaking of cuts, by the way, um, I know I'm kind of going all over the place here on this one. So actually, I want to talk about um, just what this means for the Ducks first. So Vakanainen is probably going to wind up being one of those extra guys on the roster this season. I know I talked about this briefly with certain defensemen that I think are going to make it right away. Vakanainen wasn't exactly on that list right away. So he might be like a seventh defenseman once the season begins. Brett Leeson. So Brett Leeson is back. Someone that I was very high on last season. Someone that the Ducks picked up off of waivers, and he's back. Hopefully he sticks around. again for this season. But again, the big question is there going to be room for Brett Leeson? I don't know about that. I don't know if there's going to be necessarily room for Brett Leeson there, but we'll see. Brock McGinn is expected to start in the starting lineup. Well, maybe not starting lineup, but he's expected to be in the opening night roster for the Ducks this season. Harkins, not so sure there. Pavel Regenda, I would expect to be in San Diego, but he could make a case. He could make a big case this season for the Anaheim Ducks. Noah Warren, another one of those guys that needs to have a big camp in order to try to crack the Ducks roster this season. Tarrant's probably going to wind up in San Diego along with Dionisio, Sidorov, and Hines. So I would say out of those guys, I think Vakanainen has a lot to prove. Leeson has a lot to prove. Harkins and Regenda definitely have a lot to prove, and especially Warren. Those are the guys that I think we're going to try to focus on a little bit more than normal. So that's what we've got coming up at the Shark Tank. All right. We're going to head into the first intermission right now. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this first test at the Shark Tank. And I should have put this in the bullet points and I didn't. But there's already been some cuts made before this game. So I will talk about that on the other side. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And folks, it is that time of year. Football's happening, basketball starting, hockey is starting, and you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get into like a huddle or a hunch in the middle of a game, well, you know what, folks? You can check out the latest stats, view live play by play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's fanduel.com, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. And please, folks, gamble responsibly. Welcome back to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Once again, you are locked in with Jason Hernandez. And let's talk, before talking about, in particular, the test at the Shark Tank, and this is going to be somewhat Sharks centric for reasons. I'm going to talk about the training camp roster that has been reduced. We're now down to 56 players, not including or including injured players. So here's who's just been assigned to the junior team. Alexander Blaze is going back to Rimouski, Maxime Massé going back to Chicoutimi, Wojciech Port going back to Moose Jaw, Ethan Procision going back to the North Bay Battalion, and Terrence Smith going back to the Everett Silvertips. Now, there are 5 players that were released from their amateur tryout back to their junior team. So basically, these are all the guys that are going back to juniors right away. Thomas Desero, Simon Loveson, Loic Usero, Jackson Vaughn, and finally, Michael McIver, who I was very high on. So Destero's going back to Chicoutimi as well. Loveson going back to Seattle. Usero going back to Chicoutimi. So 3 players going back to Chicoutimi. Vaughn back to Regina, and Michael McIver, of course, going back to the North Bay Battalion. Of note, McIver was the player that almost helped get the Ducks or the Baby Ducks to victory on the rookie face-off last weekend. So McIver going back to the North Bay Battalion. I'm hoping for a big season for McIver this year with North Bay in the OHL. He was one of those guys that took him as far as they possibly could last season. So we'll see what he does this season. And I'm going to try my best to keep tabs on some of the guys in juniors and how they're doing. So that is kind of a personal just quest of mine to try to focus on that. Okay. So that leaves, as I mentioned, 56 players, only 6 goalies now. Sukanik is out. So really that leaves 5 goalies, Butayets, Klang, Dansk, Dostal, and Gibby. And I mentioned who I think is going to be Ducks, who's going to be on San Diego. With a few defensemen now out, that now leaves 17 defensemen to get 6 spots. Although I think I mentioned last that most of those are chosen. Vakanainen is still going to be a wild card. Noel Warren's still going to be a wild card. Tristan Luneau, also a wild card, but probably more likely to make the roster. So we'll see what happens. Pavel Minchikov also out with injury. So I think we kind of have to have a wait and see approach to see which young defensemen are going to stand out the most. And by the way, 17 defensemen, 7 should make the opening night roster for the Anaheim Ducks, 1 extra, of course. Then the next 7 to make San Diego goals. And then after that, you got 3 extra defensemen. So at this point, everyone that is pretty much left behind is likely going to make one of those teams. That's where we're at. As far as forwards are concerned, we're down to 33 forwards. 13 or 14 of them will make the Ducks opening night roster. 13, 14 will wind up in San Diego, and then there's about 5 extra. So out of the guys who's left, there's a lot of solid names out there. I think Regenda has a lot to prove. Leeson could make the team if he has a stellar training camp. Who does that leave on the outside looking in? McGinn should be good on the roster. Ross Johnston, I don't know. There's a lot of maybe names in that entire list. All right, now that I've talked about the Ducks enough, I do want to talk about the Sharks a little bit because it's pretty important to talk about the San Jose Sharks here, mainly because they've played preseason games already and actually looked pretty solid in doing so. They do play at the Shark Tank tonight. They actually played at the Shark Tank on Sunday. They got beaten by Vegas. I didn't expect Vegas to come out this good in the rookie faceoff and in preseason, but they've looked solid. The one guy the Ducks need to watch out for. Actually, there's 2 guys the Ducks have to watch out for, and these are 2 obvious names. 2 names that I kind of talked about for the rookie faceoff that was impressive. Luca Cagnoni and Macklin Celebrini. Celebrini scored a goal and an assist in his first preseason game already. Toffoli also scored. They've got some offensive firepower on that Sharks team. They've got some good young players on that Sharks team. So it's going to be really interesting to see who the Sharks trot out. Quentin Musty was there in the last game. Sam Dickinson was out there. So you've got a slew of great young players, but they're actually like a fairly deep team. Those names that I mentioned before, Smith is really good. Bystedt. Don't sleep on Philip Bystedt of the San Jose Sharks, who could go on a tear at any time. Tyler Toffoli, obviously still very good. Spent some time with the Los Angeles Kings for a long time, a while ago. Played in Calgary fairly recently. So there are some good names there. Zetterland, I've actually been like fairly high on in the past. Gaudreau is fine. Wenberg is good. Grunstrom also good. So there's some solid players there. I think the difference between the Ducks and the Sharks as far as how they're approaching their preseason is the Sharks are looking to try to fit in some of the young guys, some of the newer guys that they are expecting to be on the opening night roster. The Ducks are still trying to figure that out, especially with injuries. So now they kind of have to shuffle a little bit to figure out, okay, if Becca Seneca is not good for opening night or even for the rest of the preseason, who is going to step up? So it's a challenge. It's a challenge for the Ducks, a different kind of challenge for the San Jose Sharks, but nevertheless, it is Ducks Sharks at the Tank tonight at SAP Center in San Jose. We're going to head into the second intermission, and I'm going to talk a little bit more just about the potential Calder candidates in this Sharks and Ducks rivalry. Stay locked in, folks. And now a brief word from Indeed. And folks, if you haven't used Indeed before, then what are you waiting for? Because we're driven by the search for better. When it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, but match with Indeed. And yeah, you can ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, messaging, so you can connect with your candidates faster. And if you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors. That is a lot. So, join the more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at indeed.com/locked on. Just go to indeed.com/locked on right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. And we're also brought to you by PrizePicks. So go ahead and download the app today. Download PrizePicks. And, first off, you could say that it's America's number one daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And you can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. And also, they put their members first. With all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. And when my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNHL on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks. Run your game. Let's talk about potential Calder candidates before we wrap up on this Tuesday morning. We are going to talk about Macklin Celebrini first. And the reason I'm starting with Macklin Celebrini is because he actually already has played a preseason game. This is kind of the disadvantage for the Ducks schedule is they start a little bit later than pretty much every other team. But at least they're starting finally. So Macklin Celebrini, for my money, is one of the leading candidates for the Calder. He was very impressive in his one game on the rookie faceoff. He looked very impressive in his one preseason game so far against the Vegas Golden Knights. And I think what separates him from a lot of other players is he has a certain presence on the ice. He's always trying to be noticed when he is out there. He's trying to inject himself into as many plays as possible. He's not afraid to take that shot because he's got a very, very good shot. So the fact that he's not afraid and has really great positioning all around, I think will endear him to the rest of the team. And it'll be one of the prime reasons why he's going to be a Calder candidate this season. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Cutter Gauthier, who I also think is a potential Calder candidate. Why has he not been mentioned as much? He hasn't been mentioned as much because of the whole trade fracas that happened. Philly fans are still going to hate him for a little bit, and that East Coast bias is going to rear its head at some point, and it's just going to be all against Cutter Gauthier. Yeah, for several reasons that I'm not going to repeat here. But he is another guy that has a certain presence on the ice that is going to demand the puck at times. He knows he's got a good shot. He knows that he's got great skating ability. He knows that he's got one of the filthiest dangles out there. So why wouldn't you put him on the same breath as a Macklin Celebrini? Those two should be your potential leading Calder candidates, Cutter Gauthier and, of course, Macklin Celebrini. How that's going to shape up, I still have Celebrini by a slight margin, but Cutter's going to give him a run for his money. Still don't know if he's going to play tonight, but I will be talking about that on the next podcast. If he does play, I'm hoping he scores a goal. If he doesn't play, you can bet your butt that he's going to play in the following game, which is going to take place here at home. And then after that, they've got a tilt at Toyota Arena, which I thought I was going to go to, but other plans have kind of gotten in the wayside, and the timing of that game doesn't help. So, yeah, a lot going on there. Before we get to the end of this podcast, I did mention that the NHL preseason has already started, and pretty much every other team in the Pacific has kind of shown their hand as to what they have. Vegas Golden Knights are still a very good team. They still have good veteran leadership as long as they're healthy. San Jose looked impressive in their one game. The Los Angeles Kings, they had kind of a sloppy game at Delta Center against the Utah Hockey Club, who, by the way, I don't know if y'all saw this. Utah Hockey Club played their first preseason game against the St. Louis Blues, not in Utah. And Utah did have a delayed penalty for them. So they were about to go on the power play. Goalie left the ice, and Utah literally scored an own goal as their first ever goal in an actual NHL game. I don't know if that's a good sign or not. I mean, I don't think that's a good sign for Utah if your first goal is an own goal. Not good karma there. However, they did win last night at Delta Center in front of a raucous crowd against the Los Angeles Kings. Utah Hockey Club looking very, very solid so far. I think they could make some noise next season. And by the way, they won in overtime and also won in the shootout. So kudos to all the fans that came out to show their support. That was really cool to see. As far as the Kings are concerned, they're in a bit of trouble. Where is the scoring going to come from for the Kings? Is the goaltending going to hold up? Are they going to hold up for all 82 games? And if not, who the heck is going to get called up from Ontario? I don't have a whole lot of faith in their goaltending pipeline right now. So I would think this is going to be just, the sirens kind of flashing a little bit for the Kings. I wouldn't be surprised if the Ducks just annihilate them in Ontario this coming weekend. All right, that's going to do it for this podcast. Kind of a quick one here before the preseason starts, and hockey is finally back. Ducks preseason hockey is finally back. And we got some actual hockey to talk about. Yay, I'm excited. All right. Once again, thank you all for your continued support. Don't forget, this podcast is free and available across all platforms, including Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, ad-free on Amazon. We're also on YouTube. We're on YouTube. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Hopefully it lit up rainbow again. But, make sure to comment, make sure to like this podcast on YouTube, and, just keep following along whenever you can. Twitter X is at StimpyJD. Show's Twitter X is at LO_Ducks. And you could email me at lockedonanaheimducks@gmail.com. Once again, thank you all for your continued support. It is so greatly appreciated. For Locked On Anaheim Ducks, I'm Jason Hernandez saying have a great rest of the day. Enjoy Ducks hockey tonight, folks. Please remember to be safe out there. Please be safe out there, folks. I cannot stress this enough. Please be kind to one another, and Ducks fly together.